Hello everyone. Welcome to Mr. Noctory, boring ancient history stories for sleep. Tonight, we're visiting the ancient Jewish people. What did Jews eat 3,000 years ago? No fridge, no dishwasher, no now food, no grab, just bread, olive oil, and a tangled web of food laws that could make you break into a sweat just for biting the wrong piece of pork. No fancy dining room, just a mat, a tray, and a simple meal. Bread, olive oil, beans, and beans, in various depressing forms. Grilled fish occasionally, if you could catch one. During Passover, Jews eat Seder, a meal that tells a story. Each dish symbolizes a memory. Bitter herbs, to remember the bitterness of slavery. A lamb bone, to recall sacrifice. A boiled egg, to speak of the cycle of life. Each bite is retelling history with the tongue. Before we begin, if you genuinely feel this is a cozy place to rest at night, feel free to like and subscribe. But only if you truly want to. Like the rule in old taverns, you're only here if you need a quiet place. And do you know what I love most? Seeing the comments, seeing where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. Whether it's New York or Norway, 1 in the morning or 5 in the morning, you're still here, and I see you. Now dim the lights. Turn on a little fan if you have one, not for the heat, but for that soft humming sound. You think you're a picky eater? That's nothing. God is the original master chef. Because in ancient Jewish culture, what you ate wasn't just a matter of taste. It was sacred. It was law. And sometimes, it was a spiritual life or death matter. Jews called it kosher, literally, proper. Figuratively, food that won't get you judged as a heretic by your own community. According to the Torah, kosher wasn't a diet. It was a spiritual contract, signed through your stomach. You couldn't just choose chicken over pork. You had to know how it was killed, who killed it, and whether it was ritually clean. One wrong drumstick could turn your feast into a full-blown communal spiritual violation. Lobster? Definitely not. Fish? Depends. Scales? Okay, no scales. Forbidden. Every creature was categorized with obsessive detail, not by nutritionists but by Torah law, the sacred book that covered everything from creation to food preservation. You couldn't just eat because you were hungry. Picture an ancient Jew, stomach rumbling, spotting a bird fall from the sky. Their first reflex, run to grab it, but then they freeze. Am I allowed to eat this? Is it kosher? Does it chew the cud? Has this bird ever argued with Moses? Before you bite, you had to answer a checklist. Does it have cloven hooves? Does it chew the cud? Does it walk on land, swim in water, or morally moonwalk between categories? Get it wrong. Please step away from the table or from the community. Because eating was a way to keep a promise to God, and a thread that tied the Jewish people together through exile, migration, dispersion across civilizations. Kosher was the one thing that helped them recognize each other through food. A properly prepared dish might not be tasty, but it tasted right in a historical sense. When ancient Jews wandered the desert, they didn't have much, but they had a spiritual contract. We will be your people, and we will not eat shellfish. And so, kosher became a divine GPS. If you think today's eat clean is hard, try keeping kosher in a desert hot enough to roast lamb, under the watchful eyes of both your village and the heavens. One mistaken bite of a catfish with no scales, and your meal turns into a small-town spiritual scandal. Kosher guided people through the desert supermarket, surrounded by temptations like roasted pork belly. Complicated, yes, exhausting, maybe. But for them, eating right was a way to say, I belong to something. I'm not just chewing, I'm remembering. Because sometimes faith sits in the stomach, and the best meal is the one that makes you feel you're living right. There was a day when an entire people had to flee Egypt, in a rush, so rushed they didn't have time to let the dough rise. And so, unleavened bread was born. No yeast, no fluff, no time. Just flour, water, fire, and faith. If you've ever eaten matzah, a flatbread as stiff as a pressed envelope, you've tasted a slice of memory. Not personal memory, but the shared remembrance of a people who ran, who starved, and who believed that freedom would come with morning. Matzah isn't delicious by modern standards. Place it next to a soft brioche or a buttery, melting croissant, and matzah looks like a misprint from the bread factory. No softness, no fluff, no butter or sugar. It's saying, I didn't come to pamper you. I came to remind you of the days when you had nothing. It's brittle in the most honest way. Chewing it, you hear the past crack in your mouth. No seasoning, no olive oil, not a grain of sugar. Now imagine a modern person tasting matzah for the first time. They take a bite, dry, hard, flavorless, and immediately reach for water. They grimace, shake their head, but then they read the text on the box. This is the bread of your ancestors, those who only had time to carry faith. And they take another bite, this time slower, quieter, because the only ingredient that mattered was the will to leave. You might call unleavened bread food for the hasty, but the Jews call it lechem oni, the bread of affliction. Not because they enjoyed suffering, but because this bread became a symbol of hardship, loss, and finally, liberation. Lechem oni didn't have to taste good, it just had to taste true, because what hurts is what sticks. Each bite recalls poverty, abandonment, a new beginning, and then reminds you they survived. Each year at Passover, Jews sit down and eat that exact same bread. Children ask, why do we eat this bread? The adults answer, because our grandparents didn't have time for the dough to rise. They only had time to carry faith. A ritual repeated again and again, not to tell a new story, but to keep the old one awake, to remember, not to complain, but to ensure that pain doesn't evaporate like yeast. Unleavened bread is a reminder, like a foundation in a house. No one praises it, but without it, everything collapses. Rough, unadorned, yet it holds up a whole community for thousands of years. You don't need fancy things to move forward. You just need something simple that you believe in. And that's why, among all the complex Jewish dishes, the flattest, hardest, plainest bread became the ultimate symbol of unconditional, unleavened loyalty. Some things seem like mere condiments, but are actually an entire liquid civilization. Olive oil, the quiet gold, flowing through every kitchen, every lamp, and every story of ancient Jewish survival. You thought they used oil just for cooking? Yes, but that's only a small part. They ate oil, anointed with oil, burned oil, offered oil, and prayed with oil. If water was life, then olive oil was the soul, with a slightly bitter scent. No butter, no animal fat. But if you had olive oil, you were holding something almost like liquid gold. It was hand-pressed, stored in clay jars, sealed carefully like a family safe. Oil wasn't just used, it was offered, preserved, traded, like a form of currency. Think today's cooking oil is expensive. Back then, spilling half a jar could make the whole family sit in silence for 3 days. In the desert, What you had were a few drops of oil from olives, crushed, pressed and cherished like miniatures of memory. Oil lamps didn't just light up a tent. They kept faith burning when everything around you went dark. Each flickering flame was a soft whisper, just like the Hanukkah lamp, burning for 8 days in legend, despite having oil for only one. People called it a miracle, but truly, it was what happens when you place trust in something small and light it. We're still here. There's still light. There's still faith flickering gently in a clay bowl. Ancient Jews anointed the heads of the dead, not for beauty, but as farewell. Oil was seen as the final gift, a drop of gentleness for the one who's gone. No trumpets, no drums, just a faint scent, like saying, you once lived and you were loved. They anointed the living to ease the heat, the pain, the confusion. Rubbing oil wasn't just ritual. It was desert skincare, no alcohol, no parabens, only gentleness and a slight bitterness. Stressed, rub oil. Tired, rub oil. Overthinking, rub again and close your eyes. Olive oil, in that moment, was the lullaby sent from your ancestors, directly to your skin. Oil didn't just moisturize the body, it held scent, and sometimes memory. Have you ever smelled something and instantly been pulled back into an old memory? To ancient Jews, the smell of oil didn't just recall food. It brought back the grandmother who lit the lamp, the mother who cooked, the father who quietly rubbed oil into his child's hands. Oil carried time through your nose, straight to your heart. It moisturized memory. If unleavened bread was simplicity, then olive oil was the soft remnant of hope. Not much, but enough to light a fire, soothe a forehead, burn in a lamp, cook a humble meal, and soften the weight of another day past. You don't need much to survive, just one drop of oil, and a reason to light it. You thought meat was the easy part of a meal. Just grill it, add salt, enjoy. No. Ancient Jews didn't just eat meat, they ate ritual. Before meat could be placed on a table, someone with proper authority had to hold a knife, and not just anyone qualified. That person was called the KOSHER, part priest, part executioner, carrying ethical weight on their shoulders. They had to study the law, they had to study technique, and most importantly, they had to learn how to keep their hand from shaking in front of a living being. Because if the blade slipped, it wasn't just the meat that got rejected, it was trust that was cut too. There had to be a death that was approved, not just any death, but CCHAPTER, the sacred slaughtering ritual. A razor-sharp blade, one clean stroke, swift, painless, without hesitation. The animal must not panic, it must not see blood, no missteps allowed, because blood is life, and life must not be treated carelessly. So if you're chewing a juicy, medium-rare steak, red, dripping, gastronomically trendy, sorry, you just committed a serious offense in the ancient Jewish kitchen. To them, every remaining drop of blood was a soul not yet released. The question isn't, does it taste good? It's, do you know you're swallowing someone's memory? CCHAPTER wasn't to make the meat tastier, but if done wrong, then yes, you probably should go vegetarian for a while. Records say just one wrong knife stroke and the entire batch of meat was discarded. The whole village went meatless for a week. Children cried, adults frowned. The butcher was sent back for a refresher in moral training. It was to let the soul leave in honor, so that afterward the meat would not become a guilty dish. After slaughtering, the blood had to be removed, not by rinsing it casually. The meat underwent something close to a ritual purification. Washed with water, soaked until the blood rose, salted thoroughly like sprinkling ashes over a spiritual wound, waited for the blood to seep out, each drop like a gilt being pulled from the muscle fibers, then rinsed again. A repentance spa for meat. A piece of kosher meat has no red marks. A piece of kosher meat has been atoned for with water and salt. No one could eat blood, because blood contains the soul. Drinking blood, swallowing a creature's memory. Ancient Jews didn't drink blood, didn't swear on blood, didn't let blood touch the dinner table. Blood wasn't food, it was a ritual. You may feel tired reading all this, but to them, this was the only way to eat without shame, to bite into meat without biting into your conscience. They didn't eat meat often, because every time they did, they had to confront life, death, ethics, and truth. There was no casual meal when a knife had touched a creature's throat. You might think this was extreme, but to ancient Jews, wrong killing, wrong eating, wrong living. Meat wasn't just meat, it was a life lesson, taught through blade, blood, and the silence after a meal. If you've ever wondered, why did our ancestors eat so many plants? Maybe it's because they understood the weight of a death too well. If the universe had a list of forbidden romances, milk and meat would be at the very top. Not because they clash in taste, but because the Torah says, "You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk." One sentence, 3 times, even without emphasis, you remember it. You might think, who would even cook a baby goat in its own mother's milk? Ancient Jews. That's not the point. The point is, you just mix life and death in the same pot. Milk, a symbol of nourishment. Meat, the result of killing. To let these two meet is like making a mother watch her child be cooked. Cruel, not pure, not kosher. So, no meat plus milk in the same meal. No meat knife used to cut cheesecake. No shared microwave, no shared sink, not even the same towel. A proper kosher kitchen is a place where every utensil has its own passport. You're not just cooking, you're managing a culinary United Nations where every spoon has a spiritual identity document. No shared dishes, no washing in the same basin. Some households even have 2 refrigerators, one for hello life, one for goodbye life. You might ask, so, what about a beef cheeseburger? Try bringing a cheeseburger into a strict kosher Jewish home. No one will scream, no one will flip a table, but the room will drop 3 degrees in temperature. Grandma will look at you like you just bit into an original Torah scroll. You didn't just bring food, you brought a spiritual conflict wrapped in a sesame bun. Sorry, cheeseburgers are apostates in the kosher universe. In Israel, there was once a huge public outcry when a fast food chain planned to sell cheeseburgers near an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood. People protested. They wrote poems. They sent handwritten letters to Parliament. Because in their world, this isn't just about eating. It's about cultural honor. One bite, a slap in Moses' face. You even have to wait 3 to 6 hours after eating meat before drinking milk. That means if you had grilled beef for lunch, you'll have to wait till evening to sip a latte. And if you forget, sorry, your stomach just turned into a UFC ring between life and death, with your small intestine as the referee. Because if it hasn't fully digested and you drink milk, you've just turned your belly into a crime scene. Extreme, maybe. But imagine a world where everything is blended. Emotions, headlines, words, even food. where boundaries are erased and the consequences show up slowly but surely. In that world, ancient Jews chose to separate milk from meat as a quiet act of resistance starting from the kitchen. Yes, it may be strict, but beneath it is a strangely human message. Do not mix life and death in a single bite. Ancient Jews understood not every tasty thing should be cooked, not every convenient combo should be made, and not everything edible should be eaten. A world where the dairy bowl doesn't touch the meat knife may sound too meticulous, but it's also a world where every meal is treated as an ethical act. You may not keep kosher, but next time you eat a cheeseburger, take a softer bite, close your eyes, and imagine Moses sighing softly beside you. There's nothing ordinary about the meals of ancient Jews, even if it was just a dry piece of bread, a sip of warm water, or a tiny olive passed hand to hand like a treasure. No buffet, no combo mix, no add extra topping. They ate what they had, but ate with awareness that everything placed on the table had passed through the filter of God. A typical daily meal might include a slice of matzah, hard as life, but the more you chew, the more it teaches, like a lesson in patience. Pickles, sour enough to wake a soul drifting from hunger. Olive oil, just one drop, enough to keep the bread from feeling lonely. Unleavened bread, bitter herbs or pickles, a bit of olive oil or fig, and if lucky, some stewed beans or a boiled egg. It may seem plain, but before taking the first bite, they'd wash their hands, not just for hygiene, but to center themselves. Water ran through their fingers like a gentle reminder. Every meal is a gift. Don't touch it with the dirty hands of thoughtlessness. And then a blessing would be said, not loud, not long, but just enough for God to hear, "I'm grateful." Behind that was an entire system of law, and such meals usually happened in a humble setting. An earthen hut, a rough wooden table, the soft flicker of an oil lamp. Grandfather cut bread slowly. Mother distributed olive oil with steady hands. A child whispered, "Can I eat the fig first?" Outside, wind. Inside the bowl, life. And between people, unspoken reverence. Who eats first? How do you wash your hands? How long should the prayer be? Which direction do you slice the bread? And if someone drops a piece, you don't ignore it. You pick it up, you look at it, and you say thank you. Because no one knows. That could be the piece that keeps you tethered to life for one more day, even if you're full. But the person beside you is hungrier, you share. Because here, food doesn't just feed the body, it teaches you how to be a human. You don't just eat to live, because if you compare an ancient meal with today's office lunch, one is dry bread and olive oil, the other is a sandwich crammed with deadlines. You'll see, they ate less, but remembered more. We eat fast because we've forgotten that a meal is a ritual. They ate slowly, not because of variety, but because within each item, there were ancestors watching. You eat to remember who you are, what community you belong to, how many generations you owe, and that you still get to exist. There's no such thing as eating just to get it over with, because over is when you forget, you still have faith to chew with. For ancient Jews, the daily meal was a pause amid survival, a slow ritual, like rinsing the soul, and a moment where no one should swallow the blessing faster than the food. They even had a full philosophical question. Should the poor say the blessing first, or the elderly? Not because of class, but to ask, who best represents gratitude? You might chuckle, but they had a point. Even a small meal is where God silently sits with you through a wooden spoon. If today you're eating alone, with a bowl of instant noodles, a slice of stale bread, then imagine this. There was once a people who saw those things as miracles. There is no meal on earth quite like the Seder. It begins under the soft yellow glow of an oil lamp, not bright enough to chase away the darkness, not dim enough to forget you are alive. You hear the wooden floor creak beneath the table, the light clink of spoon against bowl, the wind outside the door. Everything feels slower, as if it's listening with you. And then, the smell of bitter herbs, familiar like a memory you don't dare open, begins to drift from the first plate. Seder, the evening meal of Passover, is not just to eat, but to remember. Not to remember how good it used to taste, but to remember the nights of hunger, the rushed departures, the tears that never got wiped away. The Seder table is like a sacred play, where each dish is placed with precision, full of meaning. Bitter herbs to recall the pain of slavery. Unleavened bread to remember the escape so rushed they couldn't wait for the dough to rise. Salt water to imagine the scent of tears on the backs of those fleeing Egypt. Lamb bone, not to be eaten, just looked at, to remember the sacrificed lamb. Boiled egg, round, white, mournful, like life that has known parting from its first breath. Not a single dish is chosen for flavor. Each one is chosen because it can tell a story. The meal begins with a question, but before that, you might hear a child ask their grandfather, "Why is this bread so hard, Grandpa?" The old man smiles, breaks off a piece of matzah, and gently places it in the child's hand. Because back then, our ancestors left Egypt so fast, they didn't have time to let the dough rise. The child frowns. "But why do we have to eat something so sad?" The grandfather replies, eyes gazing into the oil lamp, "Because if you don't taste sorrow, you'll never understand how precious freedom is." Why is this night different from all other nights? And all evening long, the adults tell stories, the children ask questions, then they switch roles. No one stays silent too long. No one eats without saying thank you. Seder does not let you be a mere spectator. You must participate. You must eat. And imagine that you were the one fleeing across the Red Sea with bread in hand. Many families leave an empty chair at the table. That chair is for Elijah, but also for all who are absent. It could be a father who's passed away, a child far from home, a mother who no longer sits at the table. It could be you, a part of you that once believed in something and is now trying to find it again. The chair of Elijah, the wandering prophet. They pour wine into his cup. They know he won't come, but still they invite him. Because sometimes hope also needs a chair. Seder doesn't end with dessert. It ends with a promise. Next year in Jerusalem. Not just words, but the way Jewish people keep the fire alive for an unfinished dream, through a meal. If tonight you're eating dinner alone, holding a bowl of instant noodles, a cold piece of bread, try creating your own Seder. Pick any food and ask, what story does this tell? Maybe it's something your mother used to make, something you ate at a farewell, or just a flavor that reminds you of an old afternoon. Because Jews believe, if you eat with memory, you never eat alone. Phone by your side, dim light above. Imagine this. Somewhere, a family is chewing bitter herbs, retelling the old story, so that a child will remember they come from a people who never swallow their past. You think snacking is no big deal. One hand on dried figs, the other on a pillow, watching live streams. Not quite. To ancient Jews, eating was sacred. Even just a single date. You had to check. Is it kosher? Are there worms inside? Have you blessed it yet? Snack, what we call eating whatever, to Jews, was a mini moral test. The snack you choose is how you choose to show up in the world. Do you pick a whole, unbruised grape, or something with shady origins? Do you eat in gratitude, or just because your hands are bored? To them, even snack time was a moral test. You don't eat out of boredom. You eat because you need to, and with gratitude. And if you take a bite without blessing it, careful. You might have just missed your chance to move an angel's heart. There were rules. Grapes must be whole. Figs must show no signs of being stung. If sesame crackers have bits of corn silk stuck to them, double check the source. You might think, wow, that's excessive. But to them, it was a way to stay awake in a world full of flavors that can make you forget you're alive. A Jew might walk into a garden, hold a date in their hand, turning it gently like a gemstone. They wouldn't eat quickly. They'd close their eyes, inhale deeply, chew slowly, as if opening a private letter from God, delivered through taste. They'd pluck a fig, look up at the sky, and whisper, "Dear Creator, thank you for this, even though I'm only chewing it in silence." You've never seen someone eat a fig with such solemnity. But you just opened a bag of dried apricots at midnight, and before the first chew, your mind flashes an image of a Jewish grandmother, hands on hips, eyes locked on yours. "Did you bless it?" You stammer. "I didn't." She sighs, "Then put it down. Let me tell you about our ancestors first." And so, you quietly fold the bag, snack postponed, faith restored. Now, modern snacks, crispy, rich, scroll TikTok. Ancient snacks, dry, low sugar, scroll the soul. One side is dopamine, the other is discipline. One is entertainment, the other is awakening. We snack in supermarkets, in cars, in front of screens, while hitting like. We don't look at the food. We don't look at ourselves. We don't look at the sky. Maybe snacking isn't wrong, but if you eat and forget that every bite is a tiny miracle, then you're not really eating. You're just pushing something into your mouth that you don't understand. To Jews, even snacking needs permission, not from others, but from within. A gentle nod from an angel, or at least from the mindful part of you. If you think kosher dietary laws are just a small matter, imagine you're a wealthy merchant in Judea, hosting a grand dinner for esteemed guests from the temple in Jerusalem. You lay out the spread: roasted veal, boiled eggs, unleavened bread. The wine has been blessed. Everything seems perfect. Until one guest picks up a wooden spoon. His eyes narrow slightly. Has this spoon touched milk before? No one continues eating. No one speaks. You've just burned hundreds of gold coins on a feast, and now you're standing in an atmosphere colder than ice because of a spoon. The guest sets the spoon down as if it's tainted with sin. The story spreads after the meal like oil across unleavened bread. No TikTok, no live stream needed. Just one neighbor who happened to be there. And 3 days later, the entire marketplace knows. He ate meat with milk at the table in front of a priest. From then on, every time you step into the synagogue, at least one eyebrow will raise, silently asking, "Has the spoon been blessed today?" And that's it. The meal dissolves into suspicion. You, who once donated roofs for 3 families, are now viewed as if you just served up garlic sautéed sin to a crowd. Honor in ancient Jewish society didn't come from wealth. It came from small things, like a spoon that never touched milk, a knife untouched by butter, or how you broke bread without letting a crumb fall. One small error at the dinner table could erase a lifetime of trust, because to them, a meal was a mirror, reflecting a person's true character. And whether you could stay kosher at the market, at home, or at a feast, spoke louder than words. No one cared how rich you were. There was another merchant, older, richer, who hired chefs all the way from Galilee. The oven was spotless, the wine blessed 3 times, the tablecloth washed in scented water. But he used the same knife that had once cut Italian sausage to slice the lamb. A guest noticed, and that was it. From being known as the tycoon of faith, he became the man who sliced trust with the wrong blade, if the plate you use for meat once held cheese. Sound harsh, but to them, a righteous person must not be careless, even with a single bite. They had an entire system for observing and remembering who blessed properly, who had separate knives for dairy, who pretended to be vegetarian but snuck sausages in the street. In a society oppressed and exiled, where identity was fragile, eating by the rules became a way to preserve dignity. Eat properly, you're trustworthy. Eat improperly, even by mistake, and you risk unraveling the community. Not because they were strict, but because eating was the last way to stay whole. A child might be uneducated, a poor kid with no shoes, wearing patched clothes. But if they knew to bless before eating, to share bread without dropping crumbs, to give the bigger piece to a guest, no one would remember what they said, but everyone would nod. That's a child who respects the sacred, even in hunger. An elderly person might forget their grandchildren's names, no longer recite prayers by heart, but still hold the knife in the right hand, never mix meat with milk, still remember to bless before chewing. People would look and think, memory may fade, but faith remains in small habits. An old person might not say much, but if they held the spoon correctly, the entire community would nod. That's someone who knows how to keep the faith. So if today you think, eating is my personal freedom, to the ancient Jews, eating was a community vow, a promise never written, but swallowed daily. When the kitchen has cooled, when dishes no longer clatter, when the lamp casts a soft yellow trail across the earthen wall, ancient Jews still sat, not to eat, but to remember. Not everyone could read the Torah. Not everyone learned in the synagogue, but everyone knew how to tell history through food. A slice of unleavened bread was the opening line of the Exodus. A sip of wine was a leftover blessing from exile. A drop of olive oil on the tongue was the light from years of forbidden worship. No radio broadcasts, no colorful history books, only food and memory. You thought meals were just fuel? No. To them, every bite was an act of memory restoration, a living ritual where the past was set on the table and shared among all. The whole family eating together was the whole family crossing the Red Sea, enduring Egyptian hardship, carrying hope to Jerusalem, even if only with oil-stained hands. Days may pass, you might forget what you read, heard or studied, but you will remember what you ate. The mouth has its own memory. Taste buds are historians that never take a day off. And so, they continue to live, continue to eat, continue to tell. not through speeches, not through epics, but through a quiet nod, a whispered blessing, a bowl of hot soup, a spoon unstained by milk. If you're hearing this part in the middle of the night, after a day when no one asked what you ate, let me ask you instead, what's the last meal you remember clearly? If you can't recall, it's okay. You still have tomorrow, another meal to live, another bite to bring back the memory of your ancestors, or at the very least, of yourself. Don't look the king directly in the eye. Taboo in the Persian Empire. You're standing before a massive stone gate, nearly 3 times your height, engraved with winged lions, sacred trees, and lines of people carrying offerings. No bell, no greeter, only sand, and a silence thick like tar flowing slowly. You've just crossed the desert, blistered feet, cracked lips, and a heart pounding. Maybe because you're about to meet the king, or maybe because you drank water that tasted suspiciously like salted fish. Behind you, the caravan huddles beneath a shriveled date palm. Ahead of you is Persepolis, the palace amid sand, called the heart of the empire, or, if you're a slave hauling water, simply the place where you're not allowed to breathe too loud. A guard looks down at you from above, his gaze measuring whether you're a messenger or just a mosquito to be swatted. You lower your head because you must. In this world, no one lifts their head unless they want to lose it. No one says anything, but you understand. Every step you take inside is a step away from what it means to be human and closer to something called divine light. A place where the king is not a man, but a symbol. You don't call him king. You call him shadow of the divine. And you don't look at him. You look at his sandals, if you're even allowed. A slave whispers in your ear, don't look, even if you hear your name, even if you see the light, even if you hear whispers inside your head. Don't look. You nod. Not sure you can control your eyes, but at least you still have your neck. The air is cold, despite it being noon. You shiver, not from the chill, but from the awareness of your place. A grain of sand before a wall of power that can crush without reason. Golden-covered stone walls rise on either side. Carvings show gods touching thrones. Images that don't speak aloud, but clearly declare what may be touched, what is forbidden, and who will never see the full room. From a distance, you hear footsteps hitting stone. Slow, steady, as if time itself must adjust its pace to avoid disturbing the sacred. You're not walking alone. Ahead of you, 2 men, an attendant and an envoy from a distant land. The attendant whispers each ritual, each gesture. The envoy is shaking, perhaps because it's his first time learning. One wrong glance can turn a man into a memory. You try to focus on your feet, but in your head, a voice says, just one look, just a peek, then bow again. Who will know? You swallow hard. Even thoughts seem dangerous now. You sense a blurred light at the end of the room, uncertain if it's real light or just the feeling of being watched. Perhaps it's the king's eyes, or the eyes of those who once looked up and never walked out. And then a door opens. The sound of bronze gongs echoes slowly, like the heartbeat of a god who forgot to wake up centuries ago. A voice calls out, enter. Do not lift your head. Do not speak first. Do not ask. Do not forget who you are. You take a breath and step forward. You enter a room so large that voices could get lost among the pillars. This space has no time. Only the scent of frankincense, the distant ring of gongs, and a dim light from nowhere. as if power itself gave off a glow. And there, seated on a high platform of black marble, draped in golden silk, is him, the one whose true name no one speaks, whom no one looks at directly, whom no one dares to imagine bleeding. He is called Shahanshah, King of Kings, but in truth, he is a walking definition of radiant power. They say, when the king sits on the throne, everything around him bows automatically. Columns lean slightly, wind goes still, and people, unclear whether from reverence or fear, bow deeply. You stand 30 steps away, eyes still lowered, hands held over your chest, no speaking, no trembling, or at least none that shows. You wonder, does he see me? No one knows for sure. Some say his eyes are hidden behind silk veils, because one glance at a mortal could send them into an eternal sleep. Others claim he doesn't look, he simply knows. And that is more terrifying. The Persians don't need their king to fight. They don't need him to kill or rage or shout. They only need him to be there. His presence, solitary and silent, is enough to make thousands kneel. If Greek gods are jealous, combative and passionate, then the Persian king simply exists. And that alone makes others surrender their own thoughts. The king does not smile. He doesn't raise an eyebrow. He does nothing human. Even when he lifts his hand, slowly, gently, like a bird gliding through a sunset, his attendants understand the command, even though he hasn't spoken, and perhaps never will. One man is pulled from the line. You hear the sound of a sword unsheathing, like ink soaking into paper. No screaming, no resistance, no blood spilled on the stone floor. Only one less person in the room. You wait for a reaction from the king, but nothing comes. No confirmation, no glance breaking from the haze around his throne. And that silence, heavy and whole, becomes a punishment greater than any blade. No one trained the guards to read the tilt of his head, but everyone understands, as if even the air here has been trained. There's one strange thing about the king that no historian ever wrote. When he stands, you hear no footsteps, only the stretching shadow in the light. And you can't tell, is he a man or a silhouette drawn by collective fear? You try to convince yourself he's flesh, blood, breath, but each time he moves, space seems to shrink. You've seen desert storms, but never a man who makes a room hold its breath. You think of simple questions. Does he ever get hungry? Has he ever had a toothache? Then shake your head, silently, afraid to continue. You understand now. He isn't a man ruling. He's an idea operating, a breathing mechanism, a system walking on two legs dressed in gold that never blinks. The king was not born. He was constructed from fear, from ritual, from humanity's need to believe in something infallible. You still stand, eyes down, but in your heart, you know for sure, that man is not a man. He is the space between living and vanishing, the light that must never be looked at directly, the kind of power that never needs to shout, because it's already stitched into the very breath of an empire. If you survive the audience, you'll get to return, to drink a cold sip of water, to breathe, to tell someone you stood close to the light. But you'll never say, you looked, because in this empire to look is too human to be forgiven. Chin lowered, eyes cast downward, hands crossed over your chest, heels slightly together, mouth silent, even if you're begging for mercy. No words are needed. You've stepped into a script already written. A ritual not to meet a man, but to confront power wearing a human shape. In Persepolis, no one meets the king. They are granted an audience. It's like you don't approach the sun. You're warmed by its rays slipping through a thick curtain. And the first step of the ritual is not a greeting. It's the erasure of self. If you've ever prepared a slide deck for a 9 in the morning presentation after a 3-hour traffic jam, you haven't felt pressure. Here, one misplaced footstep could be seen as challenging the throne. Are you listening to this at 3 in the morning? Picture this. You're wearing thin silk, barefoot on cold stone, bending forward wondering, is my heartbeat loud enough to betray me? When you enter the great hall, you become an empty vessel. No emotion, no opinion, no strange scent, no glance in the wrong direction. A eunuch will anoint you with royal fragrant oil, ancient scent steeped through 3 dynasties. Your robe must be silent when it moves. Your shoes must be soft enough to walk without a sound. If you cough, you must cough in silence. No bells, no drums, no trumpets. Only incense dissipating in the air like fog, and your heart pounding against your ribcage. Silence here isn't void. It's dense like stone layers beneath the palace, sharp like an unseen gaze everyone fears. The atmosphere feels viscous, as if every molecule stands at attention. Each small step you take feels like carving a silent oath into the stone. You walk without yourself, as though someone detached your identity, folded it, and locked it behind a closed door. You are a shadow auditioning for a role. And the role, the script centuries old, requires one act: to bow. A eunuch walks 3 steps ahead of you, holding a ritual staff, occasionally glancing back, not at you, but to remind you that you are watched by unblinking eyes. The man ahead doesn't speak, doesn't signal. His staff doesn't support. It directs your submission. Once, someone stepped too close to the eunuch, silently, without a word. The eunuch stopped. The entire entourage froze like statues. No one spoke. By morning, that person didn't stand in that line again. You don't know where they went. No one asks. You don't lift your head, but you feel the presence, like standing beneath a tower's shadow. You don't need to look up to feel it looming. A slight nod from the king is not a greeting, but the signal you're allowed to exist. The ritual ends with a controlled retreat. 3 steps backward. No turning of the back. No exhalation. No dropping. Especially not your courage. You leave, and only after passing through the doorway are you allowed to look. Someone once asked, if you survive by bowing, why fear it? Then they looked up. No one asks that question anymore. In an empire where the king is not a man, the bowing ritual isn't about living. It's a reminder you're no longer yourself, just a small part of a preordained order. No one intends to look, but eyes, as you know, don't always obey. They are open windows. Even a breeze can pull inside. Everything. And in the Persian palace, a gust crossing your gaze can change your life. Persians don't forbid thought or dreams, but they forbid seeing. Because a glance speaks louder than any sound. It's a signal of freedom. But here, only the king may possess freedom. Some say the gaze is magic, and if any curse still exists, it is this. Once you dare to look at the light, you can never return to shadow. Worse, perhaps you disappear. Some glances are never retold, not because they are forgotten, but because the looker is no longer here to recount them. You've heard the tale of the young scribe, recently appointed from distant Elam, handsome, clever, and seemingly unaware of protocol. He lifted his head for 1 second. 1 second. One glance at the throne, whether accidental or longing. The result: no one saw him at the next ceremony. No family member appeared in town afterward, and his name on official records was spelled incorrectly, as if such a person never existed. He was not alone. An aged priest, believing in sacrifice justification, once tried glancing up too. He was quietly removed, permanently. A guard, polishing bronze, caught a reflection of light from the throne. He didn't look, but couldn't sleep for 3 nights. On the 4th morning, he was found seated upright, eyes open, but no longer breathing. No investigation, no burial. He vanished overnight, his name replaced by a sign in the roster. Not every glance is punished, only those that are seen. People say, look fast, like lightning, and they won't catch you. But the truth is, you are the only one you need to worry about, and from that moment, you never sleep soundly again. Your stomach tightens, your hands grow cold, as if your body knows. You crossed a line from which you cannot return. You try comforting yourself. It was accidental. He didn't see. Maybe the king was thinking of more important things. But then, in the silence, a thought seeps in like smoke. Did anyone else see your eyes? And that's enough to stop you from facing yourself in a mirror again. An old eunuch once said, "The eyes are a sword, and the king needs no shield." Not because the king is invulnerable, but because anyone who even intends to look will cut themselves before reaching close. People learn to bow as naturally as breathing. Sometimes they do it better than they breathe. You work in an office. You learn to pretend you don't see your boss cooking the books. Persians do too, but they train themselves not to see even the light. Here, surviving is knowing your place in the darkness and never believing you are the flame. There is a punishment unwritten in law, transmitted through silence, through omissions in records. A person punished for looking isn't beheaded, not beaten. They're erased from this world, like ink wiped off a wax tablet. No one speaks their name. No one recalls their existence. Even the witnesses learn silence at the cost of their own blood. And then you realize, in this empire, not looking is an art, a skill honed like a sword. Every day, every hour, every breath, you learn to flick your gaze like an ant creeping in darkness. You learn to be a blurred mirror, reflecting everything, but holding your soul safely inside. Once you thought you saw the king look back, just a moment, an uncertainty. But it's enough to ensure you never dare to look up again. Because here, light doesn't kill you, but daring to truly see it is death. You can never get close to the king, not because of guards, laws, or the eunuch's gaze, but because distance itself is power. The Persians never let the king sit among the crowd. He doesn't go to the market, doesn't ride horses for leisure, doesn't dine with commoners. Even with officials, he sits behind a thin veil. You might think he must be lonely. But the truth is, loneliness is the foundation of the throne. The king doesn't speak loudly. He whispers, and others must listen like it's a hymn. The king doesn't gesture wildly. He nods, and the whole assembly moves like planets obeying gravity. Distance here isn't just physical. It's scent. It's light. It's the feeling you'll never truly touch anything real. Power is like an expensive perfume. You don't need to spray it directly, just a trace in the air, and you already feel small. No one sees the king clearly, but everyone says, "I felt his presence." And that's enough. Because sometimes power doesn't need to be real. It just needs to be rumored. The The king isn't a man. He's an image, a symbol aligned with the divine. People don't need to see gods with their eyes. They just need to believe the gods are watching them. And likewise, the king doesn't need to leave the palace. Just the rumor that he woke up today is enough to make every hand in the empire rise to work. True power doesn't need to exist. It only needs you to believe it's always above you, and you to bow your head and lift your eyes at the same time. And if you think that sounds far away, think again. Your CEO, you've never met him, but every email from him makes the office tense. Your boss is on the 15th floor, you're on the 3rd, and you avoid taking the elevator at the same time like it's an electric fence. You don't know his face, but you still print reports with 3 different margins because you heard he hates small fonts. The world still runs on distance. Only now, instead of a throne, it's a frosted glass meeting room and an unnamed calendar invite. But if you walk out of the palace and ask the common people, have you ever seen the king in real life? The answer is often, no, but my father once saw the light shining from his chariot. Or, I once dreamed of him walking through a field, and no one dared speak loudly that whole day. The people who never get close are the ones who tell the most detailed stories, perhaps because they're not burdened by facts. Just a glimpse of light is enough for the imagination to build an entire palace. And sometimes that very vagueness makes power shine brighter than anything you can see clearly. Have you ever seen someone get too close to power and live long? No, because getting close breaks the illusion. And power, you see, feeds on illusion. It doesn't need to be real. It only needs to make you believe. Distance is the curtain. You don't know whether behind it is pure gold or someone trembling. And that is what makes you fear it more than the truth. Someone once saw the king's hand, thin, pale, like the hand of a sick man. Afterward, they were sent away on a permanent retreat, because to know too closely is to see he's not light. He's just a man who breathes, who dies. So you are taught, don't get close, don't ask too much, don't try to understand who he is. Love the faraway image, where light never lets you touch it. You walk past the king's statue, grand, magnificent. You bow your head, but inside, you wonder, if he stood near me and spoke like a regular man, would I still revere him? And you can't answer that, because you've never been allowed to be close. Ani Sethi. The Lonely Life of Elizabeth II, the Virgin Who Never Nodded. Night of September 7, 1533. In a damp royal chamber, thick with incense, sweat, and expectations of a male heir, a cry rings out. And in that moment, Henry VIII, King of England, a man whose ego looms as large as his crown, sighs deeply, not because the baby is unwell, not because it rained, but because it's a girl. Elizabeth came into the world not to applause, but to the bite of disappointed lips. In the 16th century, being born a daughter in a dynasty that urgently needed a son was like showing up to a party empty-handed. Everyone looks, no one claps. To Henry, it was a failed delivery, and he was not good at handling disappointment. The court sighed, the public whispered doubts, and the councillors recalculated the line of succession. Elizabeth, newborn, was instantly labelled a problem to be solved. Because her father, the man who defied the Pope, divorced his first wife and sparked a religious reformation just to marry Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn, did not want a princess. He wanted a prince, a strong son to inherit the throne and eliminate political threats from the map. Instead, he got Elizabeth, tiny, wrinkled, and completely beardless. Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth's mother, was once the most powerful woman in England. Intelligent, seductive, adept at dissecting political debate like a dancer tapping rhythm. But just 3 years after Elizabeth's birth, she was beheaded for adultery, or because Henry grew bored. Hard to tell which. Thus, 2-year-old Elizabeth became the daughter of an executed woman and a near-forgotten child by her father. She did not grow up in royal comfort. No lavish baptism like princes. No golden portraits in grand halls. Even her wet nurses whispered, "We hope the next is a boy." From her cradle, Elizabeth learned to survive by silence and observation. She had no musical doll, no embroidered silk dresses, but she had an old box of books and a tutor stricter than any church. Instead of dance lessons, she learned Latin. Instead of practicing charming smiles, she practiced not showing emotion to those who wanted her gone. Her childhood was like an ancient melody, not soft, but deep as you hear it again. She grew up in the shadow of a throne, where every step was watched as a potential threat. Compared to Edward, the crowned prince, or Mary, her half-sister, Elizabeth was like a misplaced decoration. Same blood, different status. If Edward was the blueprint and Mary the backup plan, Elizabeth was the tiny margin note, easily erased by a signature. At every ceremony, every feast, she was mentioned as courtesy, not center stage, not a Cinderella girl, but a girl to be cautious of. Funny thing is, the name Elizabeth in Hebrew means God's oath, a lofty, sacred name seemingly made for a glorious monarchy. But ironically, the bearer of that name was treated like an errant footnote in royal lineage. A draft struck out by her father's cold disapproval. A noble name, with a precarious place. Sounds like fate, right? But in the Tudor family, God's oath was worth less than a Y chromosome. And so, the story began, not with a lullaby, but with the cold silence of power. And at the center, a child destined to grow into everything her father wished for, on her own terms. Elizabeth grew up like someone always watched, but never truly seen. Not the Queen's daughter, not the chosen heir. Just a young lady, educated, attractive, and too capable of making others uneasy about their political futures. Her adolescence passed among people who always seemed to leave an unspoken question mark after her name. No one fully trusted Elizabeth. She was invited to banquets, but never seated center stage. She learned to dance only so they could test whether her steps signaled secret political alliances. Every greeting, every bow, every time Elizabeth lifted a glass, it was passed for hidden meaning. In the Tudor court, where everything was a game and no one played for real, Elizabeth, even as a teenager, learned to stand like a statue, beautiful, silent, revealing nothing unnecessary. Even when she smiled, people tried to figure out, what is she planning with that smile? Is she plotting something? Because Elizabeth, you see, was too intelligent to be safe. She was reading Latin by age 7, not because she was forced, but because books were the only things that didn't watch her with suspicion. Books didn't ask if she was loyal or scheming. They opened up and offered her a world where intelligence was power, not dangerous. She analyzed Sophocles like someone reading a crush's diary. By 7, she knew 3 things: Greek philosophy, how to fold a letter so wax wouldn't stick, and the art of answering questions without revealing a single true thought. When you grow up, where inhaling too confidently can be seen as plotting, you learn to turn every "I don't know" into a subtle political claim. She debated theology with archbishops and had the nerve to ask, "So does God support a man having a third wife?" Spoiler, they dodged the question. Every step, every word, Elizabeth weighed like a chess move, not because she loved power, but because she was forced to play from birth. At 14, she nearly lost her honor amid rumors of an improper relationship with Thomas Seymour, the ambitious widower and new husband of her stepmother. This scandal was the first blemish they tried to paint on her reputation. No proof, but enough to damage. Soon after, she was imprisoned in the Tower of London, the same place her mother entered and never left. Same stone gate, same guard tower against a grey sky. Only this time, a teenage girl was led in, not charged with a crime, but because she caused anxiety. The tower required no evidence, only the ruler's intuition. Elizabeth, in that moment, stopped being a princess and became a threat in a dress. Charge? Possibly involved in a plot to overthrow. Evidence? Unclear. Atmosphere? Cold as limestone walls. Imagine being that teenage girl, sleeping on a damp mattress with wind howling, not knowing if tomorrow you'd be released or executed. Elizabeth didn't scream, didn't collapse. Maybe she cried, but with no audible tears. They soaked into her nightgown, into cold stone walls, into every letter she wrote, and turned into a silent weapon. Because in a world where crying was weakness, and weakness lethal, Elizabeth learned to turn pain into disciplined calligraphy. Neat, precise, quietly threatening. She wrote letters to her sister Mary, carefully worded, as if each sentence could trigger a hangman's rope. And strangely, it worked. She survived. Not by miracle, but by diplomacy and desperation. From that point on, Elizabeth was no longer a girl. She became a living symbol of vigilance, someone whose every sidelong glance carried the weight of a kingdom not yet born. Others learned how to be nobility. Elizabeth learned how to be untouchable. On November 17th, 1558, Mary I, Elizabeth's older half-sister, died. No heir left behind, no one reliable, just an empty throne. And so people turned their gaze toward a woman who had been imprisoned, suspected of treason, and considered unlikely to survive. Elizabeth, then just 25, ascended the throne. That morning, mist clung thick around Westminster like a funeral veil. Church bells tolled like the sighs of a nation losing its queen, and wondering whether the new one was worth hoping for. Elizabeth donned a robe weighing nearly 8 kilograms, but the real weight was the 100 pairs of eyes in the hall, probing, judging, silently thinking. How long until she makes her first mistake? This was no grand wedding. It was an anxious coronation, everyone watching to see whether she could endure. The throne of England then was like an old wooden chair, beautiful, antique, but prone to stabbing spikes for the sitter. The previous reign, Mary, had burned over 280 Protestants. The economy lay in ruin. Europe looked at England like a cafe leaking electricity. And now, a young woman, unmarried, daughter of the traitorous Boleyn, would she dare take the throne? Many bet she'd fall within 3 months. Spoiler, she held steady for 44 years. But even wearing the crown, Elizabeth was not free. After each council meeting, advisors returned home to their wives and children. She, their queen, went back to a cold private room with only maps, correspondence, and a loyal dog. No one asked if she was all right. They only asked when she would marry. No one saw Elizabeth as a woman in need of understanding. They saw her as an empty chair that needed filling with a man bearing the right credentials and European bloodline. At every state meeting, every royal visit, every meal, the frequent question wasn't, "Your Majesty, what will you do about France?" but, "When will the Queen marry?" Marriage. It became a curse, a ghost in every royal bulletin. Because, as reasoned in that time, a country couldn't allow a woman to rule without a man guide behind her. Elizabeth did not reject marriage. Over her reign, she received more than 10 formal offers and countless unofficial suggestions. Philip II of Spain, the widower of Mary, also offered to hold her seat as consort. The Duke of Anjou, youthful, exuberant, French poetic, yet almost 20 years younger than Elizabeth. The list of proposals looked like a royal buffet menu. Many options, but each with the condition she would have to yield the throne. She received the envoys, smiled at the Duke, drifted close to marrying a few times, but each time she stepped forward, she stepped back, because she knew a married queen is a divided queen. A divided queen is a woman preparing to be replaced. On the throne, Elizabeth embodied a new symbol. Not a goddess, not a wife, not a daughter, but a political entity, firm, brilliant, and so solitary. Even she dared not let anyone get too close. She famously said, "I have married England." And if indeed England was her husband, then it was the oddest marriage in history. No honeymoon, no bed hugs, but countless times of mutual rescue from collapse. Elizabeth had no one to hold at night, but every morning had a kingdom to care for. England was a spouse who never softened, but never left either. And that was not just a clever phrase. It was a lifeline, a vow against the dangerous price of love, one that had killed her mother, isolated her sister, and nearly destroyed her. At the time, the court thought Elizabeth was playing strategy, but she wasn't. She was surviving. You may be a queen, intelligent, scalpel sharp, ruler of an empire, but you can't escape falling in love. Robert Dudley, a name that echoed like bittersweet music in Elizabeth's life. Not just a childhood friend, he was master of the horse, the only man allowed to touch her in public without whispered scandal too loud to ignore. He attended ceremonies, hunts, quiet moments behind velvet drapes. If anyone understood Elizabeth's silence, it was him. A childhood companion, one who stood closer to the throne than anyone, yet never sat beside her upon it. They read books together, rode horses together, hunted together. And sometimes they sat silently, gazing at each other in crowded halls, as if speaking without words. But there was one problem. Robert had a wife, and when his wife, Amy Robsart, died under unclear circumstances after falling downstairs, a death with no witnesses, no clear cause, but too many ready to interpret it darkly. Some said accident, others swore it was murder. In a court that preferred rumour to fact, suspicion quickly rotted any chance of romance. One didn't need proof, just the names seen too often together in state letters. Rumours sparked instantly. Does the Queen and Dudley plan a wedding? Elizabeth withdrew, even if she loved him. She could not risk dragging the throne into the scandal of a suspicious staircase fall. Any feelings for Dudley, if real, were buried beneath layers of politics, war drums, and a painful question. If I choose him, will I still be queen? Then there was the Duke of Anjou, the French prince, who wrote love letters to Elizabeth in flowery French like cheap perfume. She nearly married him. But the court objected. The public objected. Even the weather didn't cooperate. He was nearly 2 decades her junior, but youthful and persistent, like a romantic hero. Elizabeth liked his scripted innocence. It softened the harsh politics of England, free of blood-stained coups, and let her forget, for a moment, who she was. Yet that love, if you called it that, was like a birthday gift wrapped in 5 layers of diplomatic flags. Each time she tried to open it, someone knocked on the door and reminded her, "You are reigning, not dating." And once more, she didn't choose. One winter evening, they say she sat alone by the fire, reading Anjou's final letter. No one else in the room, no music, no secretary. Just the flames, the wind's howl outside the window, and a woman trying to keep herself intact, folding the letter, setting it down, and never replying. Many men orbited around her like moons around a sun, but none were ever close enough to touch her heart. For Elizabeth, love wasn't an open door. It was a window with a curtain. Sometimes the wind drifted through, but no one could step inside her home. In Shakespeare's plays, written during her reign, female characters were torn from their lovers by fate, war, or royal plot. People thought he wrote for entertainment, but maybe he was writing for the things Elizabeth couldn't say. She didn't lack love. She just knew. Love always carried danger. By day, Elizabeth is the queen. She is the ruler, the mother of the realm, the rising sun after every crisis. But when night falls and the fire in the hearth dwindles, she becomes just a woman standing before a mirror. There is no one waiting for her in the bedroom, no hand to brush her hair, no whispered good night. Only the mirror and a woman looking at herself, as if trying to remember. Who am I when I'm not the queen? She once feared death. Then she got used to it. She once feared betrayal. Then she learned not to trust anyone. But what she never got used to was the emptiness even when surrounded by bowing crowds. Even in old age, Elizabeth maintained her rule's rhythm. Each morning, she still demanded reports. Each council she sat straight-backed, lips painted red, hair in a youthful wig. Not because anyone forced her, but because she would not allow herself rest. She reigned so long that she no longer remembered how to live as an ordinary woman. Portraits depicted Elizabeth as an ageless goddess. Pale skin, high forehead, neck stretched like a swan. But in reality, she grew frailer. Her hair thinned, her teeth fell out. She avoided mirrors. She ordered that no new portraits be painted. Artists were to draw from memory, from an ideal model, not from her direct image. Her final portrait resembled a deity more than a person, because that was all she would let posterity recall. She avoided the light. She avoided herself. One day she ordered every mirror in the palace removed, not out of superstition, but because she did not want to see the shadow that was quietly abandoning the light. After 44 years of rule, outliving all enemies and past loves, Elizabeth still died alone. No husband, no child, no companion by her side, and there was no recorded last word. She had watched so many deaths that she was no longer afraid of her own. She saw her mother executed, her sister diminished by faith, and everyone she ever loved leave her life like book pages turned by the wind. Perhaps in that final moment, Elizabeth didn't need a hand to hold, but simply a place to take her last breath in silence. There was no farewell speech. Just, she went quiet, like a candle burned out. No bang, no wind, just off. But perhaps Elizabeth did not need anyone to record her final words, for her entire life was already a message. I chose to stay. I chose to rule. I chose solitude. For if I did not, this entire country would shatter. And so, in the final mirror that no one removed in time, people say, you can still see the silhouette of a woman with sad eyes and a slightly crooked crown, as if asking, does anyone truly see me, or only the role I could never stop playing? There were no formal audiences that day, no trumpets, no one pounding the door with news of invasion, just a silent palace and a woman who no longer rose. Elizabeth passed away one morning in late March 1603. The chamber was nearly soundless, only the creak of wood expanding in the walls, the dying embers crackle, and the lingering scent of lavender from the previous night. On the bedside table, a book lay open, its wind-flipped final page. No one shouted, no one staggered. Only the air seemed to have lost its center of gravity on the old silk pillow. In the room where she once read, signed decrees, and discreetly declined marriage proposals with a hidden smile. No one knows the exact second she took her last breath. The news reached the council slowly, as if the messenger did not want it to be true. The advisors sat quietly, hands on the table as though waiting for someone to deny it. For a moment, the entire court, constant in debate, shared the same expression. Stunned silence at a void too vast to fill. Some say she died at 2 a.m. Others say it was when dawn first touched the curtains. But all agreed on one thing. She left as she lived, not asking for permission, leaving nothing behind but a great emptiness. No heirs, no blood relatives, no companion by her side, only a handful of ladies in waiting around the bed. No one dared to weep loudly, because if she was still alive, she would not have liked that. Instead of tears, they stood silently, as though waiting for her to rise, adjust her wig, and ask, "Do you think I would leave so easily?" But she did not rise. For the first time in over 40 years, England had no queen to consult. Some said, days before, Elizabeth had stood for hours saying nothing. A maid recalled she simply looked out the great window, where the rose garden had begun to bloom early. She gripped the railing, eyes still as an untouched lake. When asked, "Would you like to sit?" she only shook her head, as though waiting for something unnamed. Her gaze stared into distance. No one knows what she saw. Maybe she was replaying battles, maybe remembering hearts that once stirred hers, and then went quiet. Or maybe she was just waiting for rest. At last, Elizabeth's reign ended not in blood, not in rebellion, but in a silence that spread across England. In towns, flags were lowered without orders. Church bells tolled long and mournful. Some say even the wind drifted slower that day, as if the nation had lost a heartbeat no one could replace. Not with war, but with a final breath no one heard. But perhaps that was how she wanted it. No fanfare, no pity, just a place to rest, like any weary soldier after a lifetime of wielding a sword. This sleep requires no one to awaken it. There are people born not to be loved, but to endure. Elizabeth was not a great mother, not an ideal wife, not a romantic lover. She left behind no bloodline, no family legacy, but she left behind the belief that a woman, even lonely, even imperfect, could still command the fate of an empire. She never fully loved anyone because she knew love made her vulnerable. It wasn't that she lacked a heart, but that her heart had learned to wear armor far too early. Every time she smiled was an act of control. Every time she stayed silent was a way to bury sorrow no one was allowed to touch. She was a breathing suit of armor, beautiful, cold, and no one knew how tired it was on the inside. She didn't become a mother because she knew motherhood couldn't protect the throne. She never cried in front of others because in that world, tears were not for empathy, but for exploitation. And still, that woman, for 44 years, protected a fractured England, held the crown steady, and made her enemies tremble. With nothing but a calm voice, a firm gaze, and a loneliness no one knew she carried so heavily. Maybe you're lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling. You don't need a throne to understand the feeling of being watched by expectations, of being asked to be fine, even when you're falling apart. Each of us wears an invisible crown we carry every day, at work, at home, inside our minds. And like Elizabeth, sometimes, you just wish to take it off, just for a moment, to breathe. Maybe you felt like Elizabeth, observed, doubted, forced to be strong, even when all you wanted was to sit down and exhale. If so, like Elizabeth, standing silently at her final window, looking out at the late blooming rose garden, you too are looking into the night, not to find answers, but just to breathe. That breath, however weary, is proof that you still exist. Remember this. Sometimes staying yourself is the bravest thing of all. Not all loneliness is frightening. Some of it makes you stand taller, know yourself deeper, and love this world more quietly. If you've ever chosen silence over conflict, solitude over a choice your heart didn't want, then you've been braver than you think. There was once someone who lived her whole life that way, not to conquer anyone, but just to hold on to herself, without dissolving in the eyes of others. And when you close your eyes tonight, when no one calls your name, remember there once was a queen, no one waiting for her, no one staying awake with her, yet she stood firm until her final breath. Sleep now. You don't have to prove anything anymore. You are enough, just like she was, not for anyone, but still worthy of a place on the map of history and in the heart of her own self. This sleep needs no awakening. It only needs you to feel that you are still you.